It's time for the Red Zone Warriors Fantasy Football Show with Rob the Commish Smith, Jim the Jimmer Kiernan, and Jay Cushman Corson. Let's talk some fantasy football, boys.
Kyle Rudolph, ADP 10th off the board of PPR, going at the beginning of the 9th round. When I think of Kyle Rudolph, I think of I don't know about you guys, but I think of a 10-foot tall white guy who catches red zone targets. I mean, maybe that's just me. That's how I think of him. But he's going into kind of a new situation with some new coordinators there. A lot of people are very high on him, which would mean that his value is very good, and he'll probably outproduce his value. Currently, it's at 10. I think that's going to creep up. Jay, you currently have him as ninth. I have him as ninth. Jimmer has him as 10th. What do you think about Kyle Rudolph in this Minnesota offense and what he can bring with him? They clearly, their wide receivers aren't exactly, what we're looking at in Chicago. So what do you think Kyle Rudolph can do for them next year or this year?
Well, when you think about the Minnesota Vikings, there's only really one name that comes to mind for most people. It's Adrian Peterson. Guess what? Most of the defenses they play, that's who they're thinking about too. So it leaves Kyle Rudolph a nice opening. I think he caught a huge break when they brought in Norv Turner to be the offensive coordinator. Everywhere this guy goes, the tight ends that he coached have gone on to huge seasons. We got Antonio Gates, Jordan Cameron, are two examples of that. Both of these tight ends have been great weapons for the team, and I think Rudolph is the next guy in line to be blessed by the magic that is Norv Turner. Rudolph's not unfamiliar himself with catching touchdowns. In 2012, he caught 9. He went on to his only Pro Bowl appearance of his career that year. He had injuries in 2013, so that cut his season short, and it kind of hurt his fantasy value a little bit because people kind of forgot about him. I'm not saying to look for this guy to be the big yardage guy that a Jimmy Graham is, but I think he can catch more than 10 touchdowns in 2014. I think he's a player you can grab later in your fantasy drafts and start the entire season with this guy. He's going to be a main target, I think, for Matt Schaub or Matt Castle, sorry, or whoever ends up, Christian Ponder, whoever starts there in Minnesota this year.
Yeah, and I think that would be Teddy Bridgewater, in my opinion. What do you think, Jimmer, on Kyle Rudolph going into the season?
I feel good about him. I think he's going to have a great year. Honestly, nothing negative or bad to say about him, quite frankly. I think he's very draftable, and I think he's going to, without a doubt, be a top 10 guy because he's the first check down guy. So.
Yeah, and Jay, I think you nailed it. There's not much to add here. Norv Turner, he's known for that. Kyle Rudolph is a beast in the red zone. I think in addition to the red zone skills that he clearly already possesses, I think he's going to get more catches. Jimmer, I can't believe you didn't mention Cordell Patterson. I don't even know what to do. I feel like we should pause the podcast and start over.
Yeah, we may need to re-examine our values.
I just want to say Cordell Patterson, support Cordell Patterson.
Yeah, there you go.
That's all you need to know.
Yeah, that is an approved message by the Jimmer. All right, so we all agree on Kyle Rudolph. Again, great value. I don't think you would need to necessarily back him up again with anybody else. I think people are sleeping on him, but I absolutely believe that his ADP is going to creep up from what it is currently as we get closer to fantasy drafts in mid to late August. So, all right, so we're going to move on to one Mr. Delanie Walker. We kind of briefly touched on him. This is kind of a deeper guy, but somebody that I personally believe definitely has some fantasy value, and especially in 10, 12-man leagues. He's currently, the guy's getting no love. He's going 21st off the board. This is a backup guy, a second tight end, even if you want to draft a second tight end in 10 and 12-man leagues, going in the early 13th round. Jimmer has him at 22nd, so pretty much straight up where the ADP is going. So Jimmer, this was a guy, he peaked at certain spots last year. He definitely flashed. Guys grabbed him, they used him. He did well for him in certain weeks. He was kind of hit and miss. What do you think about his potential and his consistency potentially for 2014?
Well, I mean, let's go through do a quick history lesson for everyone. Delanie Walker was kind of he was a fan favorite. Everyone loved him in San Francisco, but he basically had a 7 borderline. I'll say it borderline useless because he wasn't quite useless, but he always made the plays and he was always part of the right play, and so everyone loved him in San Francisco. He didn't really become relevant until he landed in with the Flaming Thumbtacks, aka that is Tennessee Titans, Jay, just so you know. His 60 catches and 600 yards and 6 TDs, I feel like a lot of sixes were in there, really kind of changed his whole value because, quite frankly, he was more or less used as a fullback for, as far as San Francisco is concerned. So with all that change, and actually, Jay, you kind of mentioned Norv Turner and their use of tight ends. Ken Weisenhunt, who actually was part of that and was the offensive coordinator there for the Chargers, again, he was the guy that kind of helped develop Antonio Gates. So he was very big on him. And he kind of said, hey, we, see him, being a bigger part of the game plan. That definitely increases his value. Right now, everyone's saying that he'll outperform his 28th drafted tight end position. And I think so, but by how much, I really don't know. He's a guy that you got to tether. I mean, if you're going to draft, someone, like Kyle Rudolph, you probably don't need to tether someone. But if you're going to draft, some lower-end tight ends and kind of avoid them and risk going for more wide receivers or whatnot, then he's something there. One of the big things I have and I'm very concerned about is who the hell's throwing to him. I mean, I couldn't tell you who's going to be the starting quarterback. I mean, Jake Locker, if he's healthy, maybe. Who's in the backfields? Who's the wide receivers again? Like, there's a lot of questions just in general, and I'm really questioning the Titans as a whole offensively. So that's my big thing. I think age is a huge factor here. This is year 9 for him. So I think he is a candidate for IR, so I would definitely be hesitant drafting him, and I think he's something you can find off the waiver. So that's me. Any other consolations, thoughts, guys?
Yeah, I'm just going to stay away from this guy. Somebody else wants to play streaming with their tight ends. With this guy, they can. You mentioned, that they were going to use him more, but does he have the talent, really, for them to do that? I just don't see it. I've got him at 22nd, which is right where his ADP is, I believe, and that's where he'll stay. I probably won't even touch this guy. Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm a little higher on him than you guys are. I've actually got him at 14. Maybe I should be flogged for that. I'm not sure yet.
Absolutely.
I guess
Quickly.
time will tell.
Your love for old people is sick.
Yeah, minus Brady. So, last year, his numbers did jump last year, guys. I don't know if you're looking at, granted he's in his 9th season or whatnot, but his receptions went up like by 300%. He had almost 600 yards. He had every number that we give a rip about in fantasy went up considerably. And as you mentioned, Jimmer, they don't have a whole lot of other options there to throw the ball to. Again, I've got him at 14th. He's not a guy that I'm going to draft as my tight end 1 because clearly he's outside of 10 or 12, and that's the largest, leagues that I play in. I think he is a streaming guy. You probably can get him off waivers unless you have multiple guys in your leagues that draft more than one tight end. But I think he can definitely flash for you. I think he's a fantastic guy to play on your starting tight ends bye week. If you're in a 2-flex league and you're having some bye week issues, I think you could plug him in there and get some good production. So I'm not going to just completely – I don't think he's irrelevant. I think he is relevant, but I think he's a late-round pick or at least someone to pick up off waivers and keep an eye on. So we'll kind of end the conversation on Delanie Walker there. So the last guy we're going to talk about in today's show, and there's 2 reasons we're going to talk about this guy. One is because the Cushman said he was going to punch me if we didn't. And secondly, because he was the Lions' number 1 pick in the NFL draft, and that is one Mr. Eric Ebron. This guy it's interesting. Like I said, tight ends typically do not do well in year one. A lot of it's a product of their offense. But like I mentioned before with Jordan Reed was on a historic year before he got his concussion issues, or I should say they continued for him. So Jay, ADP, I don't know if this is hype because of the draft, because he was a first-round pick. I don't know if it's because it's so early in the period or what, but the reality is over thousands of mock drafters, he's being drafted as 11th as of today in 12-man leagues, late in the 9th round. I'm not a believer of this, nothing personal against him, but just because he's a rookie tight end. You've got him at 10. I've got him at 18. And actually, Jimmer, wow, you've got him at 11. So, our resident Lions fan, the Cushman, state your case for one Mr. Eric Ebron going into 2014.
Lions recently stated they want to use him similar to how the Saints used Jimmy Graham. Big surprise there. No, it's not a big surprise. The guy's an athletic weapon. He operates out of the slot. It makes sense. The new offensive coordinator has spent a few seasons with the Saints and is quite familiar with Jimmy Graham, so that's a good thing for us Lions fans, I think. During his final year at the University of North Carolina, Ebron lined up 71% of the time. He's not a good blocker, so it's logical that this guy's just going to be a wide receiver, basically, for the Lions, and I think he's going to see a lot of targets. He's going to be used similar to the way Norv Turner used Cameron last year with the Browns. Actually, the only tight end to line up in the slot more than Cameron last year was the great Tony Gonzalez. So this guy, he's just going to be a wide receiver. Like I said, wide receiver. That's what you got to think of him as. Draft him as a tight end, stick him in there. He's going to be top 10. According to Pro Football Focus, Stafford actually targets his tight end about 25% of the time over his career, which is above the league average of 20%. Guy's going to be top 10. If you can get him late in the 11th round, I say go for it and run with it. Back to you, Rob. I'm going to see if I can unmute Jim so he can add to my victory on this point.
Okay. Damn, Eric Ebron, again, I'm just not going to be the guy to pull the trigger on him, and clearly you're in a lot of my drafts, and you're a Detroit homer, and you're going to pick him well before I ever would, so I don't really have to come across this issue except for leagues that we're not in together or we're actually playing together. So, I just, Pettigrew's still there. They signed Pettigrew to a 2 or 3 year deal just this offseason. They may or may not regret doing that. I don't know clearly if they had Ebron in mind at that point. They decided to draft him in the first round so early, but I think he's potential. I mean, from what I've seen, he's got all the potential in the world. I have no doubt about that. I think this is one of the best offenses a tight end could have landed, because even though they signed Pettigrew, the guy has hands of stone, as we have seen time in and time again. With Calvin Johnson there, the guy's going to be open. There's a lot of hype around, and it's legit, frankly, around this Detroit offense, was as much as they throw the ball, adding Golden Tate, that's just going to, open up things in the middle for a tight end who can catch the ball, and all intents and purposes, this guy can. So I think he's okay. I think Jimmer's back. So
Rob, let me chime in real quick on this. Stafford's going to throw for 5,000 yards this year. So this kid's going to see some looks. I think this first year it's a little tough to say what he's going to do. I'm more drafting him on potential. I think he could end up being a fantasy keeper.
Well, yeah, and that's what I was going to say. I would definitely not draft him as my tight end one in a 10 or 12 man league for sure. If you're in like a deep 16, 18, whatever, and you want to wait on tight ends and take that risk reward scenario, absolutely go for it. I think he will be drafted in most leagues because of the hype around him, and I'm not saying it's not legit. I just see him doing this in year 2 and 3 and not necessarily a year 1, and that's just kind of where I stand at that. It'll be interesting to see how his ADP changes from now as we get closer to the actual fantasy season. So, all right, guys. Well, that wraps it up for our quarterbacks and tight ends for this podcast. On our next show, we are actually working to put together a 10 to 12 man or woman, for that matter, mock draft. Hopefully sometime next Thursday. We're going to have a good group of fantasy football degenerates such as ourselves to do a live on the air and discuss our picks as we pick them, our rationale and mentality about why we picked a guy where and what our thinking process is for doing so. So I don't know about you guys, but when I listen to podcasts, that's one of the favorite things I listen to is mock drafts and listening to why these guys do what they do. So go ahead and look out for that. We'll definitely keep you posted via Twitter for when that is going to be done. You can watch it live on YouTube and then when we're going to be releasing that. But again, we're hoping to do that this coming Thursday. In the meantime, go to redzonewarriors.com. You can watch all of our previous episodes. You can see our rankings. You can subscribe to the show via iTunes. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter. Tweet us your fantasy football questions at RedZoneWarriors. So for the Cushman, the Jimmer, I am Rob Smith. And remember, if you are taking a fantasy football season off, then you are already losing. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.
I'm drafting QBs in the first 3 rounds.